Like a simple theory that I came up with recently that I want to analyze now is like all words exist only in society. So it's kind of like the tree falling with nobody to hear it. It's like words when they're not socially like heard, interpreted, perceived. I have a rhyme about it as well. It's like with these freestyle rhymes or words not be heard if they weren't spoken aloud or something along those lines, like a figment, parchment, like part of a rhyme, sort of like semantically, kind of not verbatim. So it's kind of like, yeah, I feel like probably if I was alone on an island, maybe beatboxing is more intuitive and natural, and like maybe that's because of the serene calmness of nature. And I posit that punishment, the concept, is a perversion, like in the societal context, because I posit that what that does is poisons psychology, and it starts having like associations and minds being tainted in terms of like bad trip vibes, like kind of vibes, essentially basically the same mechanism fundamentally. And I feel like ultimately how punishment came to be in terms of like the construction of laws and the criminal justice system is like people started equating violence, which is natural, like, you know, a fucking lion attacking a gazelle doesn't get face time, present time for that. Because, like, I posit that in truth, in reality, like, the truth shall set you free type shit, like, everything in nature is just, it's justified in its existence. And so, therefore, like, a perversion of justice is a fracturing of ontologies that's based on fallacies, logical fallacies, like, or just false, like, it's not truth, it's not just. And I feel like that's ultimately what jurisprudence aims to kind of outline and like capture, like encapsulate, and basically encrypt or encode, like encapsulate in laws. And I think that ultimately the concept of punishment came from, like, maybe like I'm not that clued up sociologically or anthropologically, like in the sense, like I think there were Denisovians, and I think they are different from Homo sapiens. And I feel like, as far as I know, maybe I'm getting it confused with Neanderthals or Denisovians. Like, there was a different group that was different from Homo erectus, I think, as far as I know, that like got a really like that got killed a lot by the Homo sapiens. And I think it's because of their like brutish ways, in terms of like violent ways and disregard like towards nature, like to things lesser than them in terms of brute strength. Like crushing life because it like for no reason, like they don't even like benefit from it. It's just like malevolent. And so I feel like Homo sapiens use violence against these people and kill them off. And as a defense mechanism, that group of beings came up with like soothsaying, which was a way to psychologically pollute the conscious experience of the human beings in a way that resulted in the humans starting to perceive things along similar lines to the, let's say, Denisovians. I'm just taking a stab in the dark, maybe this is so. And so basically what happened was the Denisovians were weak and frail. Maybe that's why they sort of took it out on lesser life or like less powerful life and like crushing them. And it's like basically bullying. Like they felt like, I feel like maybe they were bullied, and so they took out the pain on like lesser creatures in terms of brute strength, raw power or whatever. And then what happened was they started soothsaying, which poisoned the psychology of the humans, which resulted in, yeah, like I was saying, the humans starting to think along similar lines to the Denisovians, except there was a grammatical disjunction because the weak and frail Denisovians saw the violence targeted towards their peoples or whatever, their beinghood, however they view things, like along psychiatric lines, because I posit they're psychiatric thinkers, and they equated violence with punishment. That's how they viewed things. So they started soothsaying to pollute psychology informationally, like malinformation, in order to cause human beings to start equating violence, which is natural and just, like justified in its existence, I feel like, with punishment, something that ought to be punished. And it's like a societal thing, like uh, societal expectations. And so essentially the disjunction grammatically is the Denisovians viewed, basically equated violence with punishment, and they basically resulted in the humans equating violence with something that ought to be punished socially. And so that basically resulted in the fractured psychiatric ontologies that are currently dominant in the West and I posit like in society today, essentially. And one variation, like a possible splintering of the theory, is that it wasn't so ruthless in terms of the Denisovians getting slaughtered by the humans. Maybe it was more like ethical bullying, to use words hypnotically. In to extrapolate in this like fracturing of the theory, or splintering rather, potentially, the bullying was actually like bullying, like ethical bullying. It wasn't slaughtering. And so essentially the Denisovian, or the individual, the soothsayer, or what have you, was actually a part of the social group of the humans. And so, in this sense, they were an individual in a social group rather than a person in a social group. And so, basically, the soothsayer basically manipulated trust in a cyber criminal sense. And yeah, I posit that basically punishment, the concept within the societal context of a social human network, I posit like humans are all one species, one race, so one social group. And I posit that the soothsayer basically started poisoning psychologies in a neurotoxic way, and that caused negative associations and runaway trains of paranoia and like all these things, like in terms of the damaging effect of the neurotoxin. It's basically evidenced, or it can be seen evidently in all the violence that pops off in the world that results in carnage and slaughter, and basically homicide, rape, and torture, which I posit are like the favorite terms. I say terms rather than words for the cyber criminal, or the criminal responsible for that soothsaying, or group of criminals, essentially, because they're terms, not words. Because in terms of how I view the psychology of what I posit as the cyber criminals, they're responsible for the poisoning of the psychology of humans en masse. Basically, yeah, they view language as a tool. Like they they don't actually know language. They know about acoustics and how to reverse engineer and do attack patterns, and like attacks in a cyber sense, in terms of like blind return oriented programming. So they know how to use like larynx and percussion to use their mandibles and vocal cords to create movements biophysically, but they don't give a fuck about the words. They're just aiming to get into your nervous system, into your endocrine system, by injecting basically malinformation, which manipulates biology. And this isn't stipulation, this is psychology. And I hope to get a PhD in psychology from the Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences and represent New Zealand as a scholar more so than I already am. Shout out to AT for my MCIs and for my BCAs and everyone who was a part of that, including everybody. And auto hypnosis, I love everyone and everything.